and kings. I'm like, here we go. It's going to be Saul and David. That's exactly what we're going to, because that's usually what you go to when you think of God's providence and sovereignty over kingship. That's usually the story you go to. We as people, we like these individuals that we think favor us, as in Saul, but God looks on the heart. He chooses, and he does. But I thought it was really interesting to use the story of Daniel and what a wonderful fit that was. So before we get started, was there anything in the video that just really stuck out to anybody? Yes, Boo.
What I enjoyed, he's a great storyteller, and Jesus was a great storyteller.
Mm-hmm.
It points to be made very emphatically through a story, and we're drawn into it. Mm-hmm. And just the way he told that, to actually put yourself there and imagine this scene happening, and the terror of the king who just thinks he is invincible, and then this hand. I mean, it really was.
It is. It is. Yes, Doug.
I was hoping you would have a diagram of reverted that water.
Yeah. So I did look it up. I didn't bring a diagram. I didn't bring the diagram, but I did. I enjoyed it, and I'll share that with you. Just some background when you learn about it, and that's the first thing that I'd heard of Babylon, and I had understood it, but it was a city-state, which is really neat. And so, like, to learn about Babylon and understand what Daniel and the people at the time thought about Babylon is really interesting. And so, does anyone have anything to go with it? If you don't, but yes.
The king's behavior and his actions are constantly back and forth. Like, he's very self-righteous, his kingdom is the best, everything, like he's his own God. And then something will happen with Daniel. Daniel interprets the dream. He's like, oh, praise the God of Daniel, and then back to himself, and then the furnace, oh, praise God of Shadrach, all these things. And it's like, how do you not get it? And obviously it's like the Lord is using him for his purposes. Very similar to like Pharaoh, like, okay, I'll let your people go, and then his heart's hardened. And it's like, why? I guess those people in like powerful states and influences, the ebb and flow of, okay, like softening his heart to a degree here to let his purpose work through Daniel, like he doesn't just wipe out his people, but then hardening him to show, like, you're not of me, but I'm going to use your status, It's just really interesting, because, Daniel's already told him the dream of his kingdom and the kings after him, and all those things are going to happen in that statue. And now here we are with the writing's actually on the wall, and he's like, oh, like, this is real. This is actually going to happen, And so it's just interesting to see how God, like the scripture that say, like the waters, like he controls the flow of that. And so just to see the ebb and flow of him, recognizing there is a God here himself, but then immediately always falling back into being his own God again.
Well, and that's like the theme of the entire, Old Testament. Constantly, and it just goes to show you really man's depravity. In all truth, like there's nothing of yourself that can bring yourself to God. There's just nothing. If God can rain fire down on Egypt, on a city, and you watch that, and then go, you know what, we should build a golden calf and worship it out here in the desert. You know what I mean? There is something so twisted and so wrong in your very being, like you cannot bring yourself to God. It's impossible. Really, and people really need to understand that. And that's really just as big a theme in the Old Testament as God's grace and providence is man's depravity. Over and over and over again, they turn away. Over and over again. You can interpret dreams that come true before your very eyes, and the guy say, this is God, and this is what he's telling you. And you go, you know what? You're right. Do it. And then, like you said, a week later, you're back again worshiping other gods and doing, which is what Nebuchadnezzar did over and over again. So, but yes, thank you, Amy. That's great. Yes, Bill.
The Lord's control over the rulers of men.
Mm-hmm.
He can just do what he wants to do. That very night, Belshazzar, he's gone. It's over.
Yeah.
It's over. It's done.
No.
It's just absolute pawns in his hands, and he's working his plan, and so we need not fear.
Yeah.
Except to remember, one day
Mm-hmm.
we'll breathe our last as well, and so we will perish. Yeah. And so that should humble us, but it should encourage us and comfort us, because he's sovereign. Despite what we see in the news and all of that, he can take them out and just one fell swoop.
Yeah. I think it's really important, just with everything going on with an election year. I'm gonna keep saying that, and I think we need to remember, nothing is outside of God's control, no matter what. And like, it's so easy, especially in today's society, to put your faith in men, and that men are going to do this, and men will bring this thing about. But unless God wills it, it's not happening. That's just the truth. There was a song they did a remake of that. The older hymn, what's it called? This Is My Father's World. You know that one? I was listening to that this week, thinking about it. And like, this is the Father's world. You know what I'm saying? And one of the lines is that, I rest me in the thought, and that should be a rest for us. That despite who's elected, however many months from now, it doesn't matter, because God's still king, and he always will be. Yes.
Speaking of God's sovereignty, I didn't get a chance to read or watch the video this week, but I work from home, and I transcribe files for this company, and one of the files that I got this week just happened to be I think it was 14 or 15-year-old teenager. And the church that he goes to allowed him to preach that week. And I got to transcribe that whole sermon, and it was on this exact same thing. The exact same things that you're saying, he said so sweetly. And for a 14-year-old kid to get up here in front of all these people and say all that with no stumbling, no anything, he was so zealous for the Lord, and it just shows, God is in our lives as well. No matter what, He sees you through every single thing, even when you think it's not that great.
Yeah. Praise the Lord. That's awesome. Well, we'll go ahead, because I do want to talk about Babylon just a little bit, because it is extremely interesting. So if you don't know, okay, Babylon is in modern day, or it would have been Iran. Okay, and it rests in between the Euphrates and Tigris rivers. Now, the rivers are fairly far apart, and they come down like this through Iran, but there's one bend where they become very close to each other, like this. And Babylon rests in those bends, which made that area an extremely prosperous area. And that's one of the reasons that they grew so fast and became so powerful. They lived in a prosperous region that could grow things. The river actually ran through, I'm not sure which one or if it was branched, through their city. Now, their city, when you look on a map, to what experts think it looked like then, they have some, disagreements maybe. But the idea is, when you look at the foundations, it was almost a perfect square. So like just this big square, and the river goes right through the middle, like dead through the middle of the city. And there were bridges that connected one half to the other half as you passed through. That's the idea. And so Babylon had been conquered and taken over, the city itself, by several different empires, like the Amorites at one point, I think the Hittites, until Nebuchadnezzar took it and kind of made it the empire that it was. And of course, he conquered Jerusalem, or Israel, Judah. And then when they would conquer, a common practice of Nebuchadnezzar's, he would take, and this was common of the time anyway with others, they would go take royal family members or lords and bring them back with them and raise them. And the idea is that they controlled this territory, and they would indoctrinate the leaders of these areas. And so when they would come in, like when he took Daniel, he didn't just take Daniel, he took, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, which that wasn't their original names. Those were their names given to them by the Babylonians. But they would take them to Babylon and try to indoctrinate them in their ways and their beliefs, which is fairly common in older times. Now, what's interesting about the whole thing, really, when you think about it, and why it's important for us, is we live in modern day Babylon. Okay, we need to realize that. Okay, why does this story affect you? Because you live in Babylon right now in this moment. Babylon at the time was the largest city in the world. It was the most technologically advanced city in the world or country. It had more money, more access to food, more access to goods, more pagan practices, more all these things than anywhere else you could possibly be. Okay? And when you think about it, we do too. I mean, in reality, we do too. When I think about everything that you have compared to other places in the world, if you want to eat, you have numerous options that you could drive to. You could walk down this road from here and eat and run into 4 grocery stores. You can throw a rock from one restaurant to another to go find food. There is more, you're connected to the entire world on your phone and have access to more information, more practices, and more things than ever in anybody's lifetime. People here live longer. People here have more medical care. People here have more options of anything they want to do, of fun they want to have, of wickedness they want to participate in all truth. And at the time, Babylon was the most advanced. They were famous for architecture. Like that's one thing they talk about, the things they built. Their defenses, as RC Sproul talked about in the thing, their walls and everything. They had developed multiple languages. They had a better system of economy. They had better systems of transportation, better weaponry. They developed, they were using math that the Greeks thought they had discovered, but in truth, the Babylonians had been practicing for years. The Babylonians invented trigonometry. And if you don't know what trigonometry is, join the club, okay? Because I don't either, okay? But the idea that they were, that's how you need to think about them, that they were that advanced. And so there's a reason that chapter 1 is so important. That's where I really want us to start to understand the background of 5, where this story takes place. Okay, now the one verse I want to read before that I think is important, that overshadows the whole thing, that I thought of as soon as I listened to the message, was Proverbs 21:1. And we know this one, it's a famous line if you've heard it. The king's heart is like a channel, and this is why I thought it was good. It's like a channel of water in the Lord's hand. He bends it wherever he wills. Right? When you think about the way that they were defeated, the water is channeled out, in march the Persians, and that night ends his life. But we'll start in 1. And I want you to listen and tell me if this doesn't sound like the world that we live in today. So I'll just start in 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, thank you, appreciate that. The king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the vessels of the house of God. And he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and he brought the vessels into the treasury of his God. The king ordered Ashpenaz, the chief of the officials, to bring some of the sons of Israel, including some of the royal family and nobles, youths in whom there was no defect. Now listen, this is important. No defect, who were good looking, showing intelligence in every branch of wisdom, endowed with understanding and discerning knowledge, who had the ability for serving in the king's court, and he ordered him to teach them literature and language of the Chaldeans. The king appointed them a daily ration of the king's choice food from the wine which he drank, and appointed that they should be educated 3 years, at the end of which they were to enter the king's personal service. Now among them from the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The commander of the officials assigned new names to them. Daniel was assigned Belteshazzar, to Hananiah, Shadrach, to Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah, Abednego. Now, a couple things that you may not see just in a glance of reading. The people of Babylon valued many of the same things that we valued in individuals today. They valued beauty in the way people looked. They valued leadership. They valued smarts. And so it was kind of like they wanted to fill their city with the smartest, most beautiful, most successful people that they possibly could. That was the idea. That's what they wanted. And when you think about today, who do we try to put out in front of everybody? We value the smartest, most beautiful, most successful, right? That's who gets to write books. There's plenty of smart people in the world, but we want someone who's got billions of dollars and drives cars and shoots rocket ships into space, right? That's what we look for. The more impressive you can be as a person, the more loyalty and respect you warrant. Okay, and that's not how God works. That's really the opposite of how God works, right? For we look on outside appearance, but God looks upon the heart. But that's what their very civilization, right, in their values are based in. Okay. Now the names they were given. So like when I read them, I'm like, I don't know David and his three friends. And then it's like Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. I'm like, I know those guys, right? I know who they are. But their names were given, and they all have relevancy to their religion there. Okay, so if you don't know, Belteshazzar, which was Daniel's name given, means protect the king. Okay, not his king, the king of Babylon, right? And so Hananiah, so I can go through the names, I wrote them down. Okay, but Hananiah in Hebrew meant the Lord is gracious to me, which was his given name. Okay, when he was given the name Shadrach, that means I'm under the command of Aku, the other god. Okay, and so on. For Abednego, that means servant of Nego, their other gods. So they were given names that pretty much represented the pagan gods of Babylon. Now, this was really important to them. So when they brought people in, when they brought slaves in, they conquered, they tried to force them to worship their gods and be a part of their culture. Okay, that's what they wanted. And so these names were all about their gods and their kings and their people. And one of the things they do is you read in 5 with the drinking dishes, as I was reading about the practices of the Babylonians, they would often make people watch or do things as you made fun of their gods to show that your gods were superior to them, like a dominancy thing. Like they believed that there were thousands of gods and all these gods, but that they were favored amongst all because of who they worshiped. And so that's where they are. And so the whole point is they want these 4 individuals to, MacArthur literally calls it brainwashing, but to totally, what do you call it? When one group comes together to another. Assimilate into their culture. That's perfect. That's it. That's exactly what they want them to do. Sorry about that. Okay. Right. Now, what's really important, I think so important about the names, do you know what most people do when they change identities and they assimilate into cultures or change? Do you want to know what the first thing they do is? They change their name. They change their name. It's the first thing they do. I work at a high school, and when kids and work with kids who think that they belong to the other sex, which they don't, but belong to the other sex, the first thing they want to do is have you call them by a different name. That's the first thing they want. The first thing that a lot of people want to do when they migrate to the U.S. is change their name. Because they want to be American. My cousin delivers babies in the nursery, and they had an immigrant family come in, and she helped them deliver their baby. And they're like, since this baby was born here, it's American, we want to give her an American name. And they said, what's your name? She said, well, it's Brittany. And they're like, all right, that's the baby's name, And so, like, congratulations, okay? But they did, but that's very, very significant, very significant. And so that's what they asked. Now, of course, Daniel in them don't, okay? So they may be called the names, but Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food or with the wine that he drank. So he sought permission from the commander and now the officials that he might not defile himself. And now God granted Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the commander of the officials. So there's God's providence in action as Daniel says, pretty much, I don't want to defile myself and assimilate into this culture. Okay? I don't want to become Babylonian. I'm not. I'm not going to worship the Babylonian gods. Now, this would have went very poorly for Daniel, obviously, in his standing, but God was gracious and made literally the people in the court favor him. So there's the first act of God's providence that you see throughout the story. And so that's really the setting of what has happened as you get to 5. Now, as you go through the chapters, I can't read 4 chapters in the time we have, but just to sum them up, that's chapter 1 of their taking there and the changing of their names. Chapter 2 is the interpretation or the rise of Daniel by interpreting dreams. So Daniel and his friends, Daniel was able to interpret dreams for Nebuchadnezzar through God's providence, and he rises him through the ranks of favor. Okay, in 3 is the story, we all know it, of Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, and the fiery furnace. And then 4 is the last, is where we transition to 5. 4 is where God humbles Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, this is the part where Nebuchadnezzar acknowledges God, then he becomes arrogant, then God makes him like a beast in the field. He goes out and wanders, and then God gives him his sanity back, and it's like, do you see now who really controls the heart of the king? Who really does all of this? And that's where you're at in 5. Okay, and so we'll read through it. Yeah, so the king is dead. They think the approximate years they think after that Belshazzar's reign. It's been about 20 years since Nebuchadnezzar has passed away, and so 20 years have passed. There's a new king in town, but there's also a new empire, and it's the Persian Empire. So you have to understand this very night, the Persians are probably outside the gates, okay, of the city of Babylon, trying to conquer it. Right? It didn't all happen in one fell swoop or not. They just snuck in. Okay. But the idea is that they were under siege, or knew they were at least at war with the Persian Empire. And so the feast that Belshazzar is throwing is probably a religious act. Of course, RC Sproul was saying something to pray for help from their gods. Okay. Something to stir their gods, or whether that or they're just smug arrogance and thinking there's no way they'll ever enter this kingdom. And it's probably some of both in reality. And so that's the setting. Now, Daniel, as you see for the first part, is not present. Okay, but it says, Belshazzar the king held a great feast for thousands of his nobles, and he was drinking wine in the presence of the thousands. And when Belshazzar tasted the wine, he gave orders to bring the gold and silver vessels of Nebuchadnezzar, of which Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken out of the temple, which was in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles and his wives and his concubines might drink from them. And then they brought the gold vessels that had been taken out of the temple from the house of God, which was in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles and his wives and his concubines drank from them. And they drank the wine, and they praised the gods of gold and silver and bronze and irons and stone. Okay, this is a mockery. This is to mock God. That's exactly what the purpose is. Okay, in his drunkenness, I don't know if he thought it funny, if he thought to rub it in their face, if he thought for whatever reason, but it's pretty much in sheer arrogance that he does this. Okay, now, what's really interesting is in the next line they talk about this, but to them to assert dominance of your gods was in hopes that they would strengthen you. Does that make sense in pagan practice? The idea is that if we'll mock other gods, our gods will even favor us more and strengthen us more and make us stronger. Okay, and so in the next line, suddenly the fingers of a man's hand emerged, and they began writing opposite the lampstand on the plaster wall in the king's palace. And the king saw the back of the hand that did the writing. Then the king's face grew pale with his thoughts, and his thoughts alarmed him, and his hips joints went slack, and his knees began knocking together. And the king called aloud to bring in the conjurers and the Chaldeans and the diviners. And the king spoke and said, Wise men of Babylon, any man who can read this inscription and explain its interpretation to me shall be clothed with purple and have a necklace of gold around his neck and have the authority of the third ruler in the kingdom. Okay. So really that's second in command to the king. There were probably 2 at the time, whether he was saying his heir was probably number 2, so the third would be next outside the royal family. Now what's important is, why the hand? I've thought about the hand. I don't know why the hand. No one really knows why the hand. But the significance and symbolism is this. Okay, throughout a major theme throughout Daniel is God delivered into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar all that he wanted, right? When you read through 1 and 2, you're constantly getting this theme of, and God gave Nebuchadnezzar, or into his hand, he gave them this, 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 and this. So the entire time, Nebuchadnezzar's success in the empire of Babylon was built on God's providence. Okay, everything that they have, everything that they conquered was given to them by God. Literally tells you that, into their hands. And you get this theme of their hands, their hands, their hands, their hands. Okay, they had this, they had this. They had strength, they had power. They had honor, they had glory. All given to them by God, right? Really even unto their own destruction in their own arrogance, right? And then we see the hand of literally God, right? The God that controls all men, the hand that controls all hearts, right? Writes on the wall, okay? And in the might of Babylon and their empire and their king, in his feast, right? He becomes so terrified and afraid that he's literally shaking uncontrollably. Okay? So that's the idea that you get, that when faced with the real hand of God, when faced with who really has the power, there's no misunderstanding in truth of who has true power and authority overall. And you think about too, when with people like this who have put so much faith and hope into everything else, you really should be afraid, because where else do you go when you think about that, right? Like, we have peace in knowing that no matter what comes, that through God's providence, we're cared for and loved and taken care of, right? They don't. He doesn't. So he's terrified. Okay. So King Belshazzar was greatly alarmed, and his face grew even paler, and his nobles were perplexed, because no one could interpret the sign or the writing on the wall. And so the queen entered the banquet hall because of the words of the kings and his nobles. And the queen spoke and said, O king, live forever. Do not let your thoughts alarm you and your face be pale. There is a man in your kingdom who is a spirit of the holy gods. And in the days of your father, illumination, insight, and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, appointed him chief of the magicians and conjurers and Chaldeans and diviners. This was because of his extraordinary spirit, knowledge, and insight in interpretation of dreams, explanation of the enigmas, and solving of difficult problems, which were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Let Daniel now be summoned, and he will declare the interpretation. Okay, so in all this kingdom, Daniel's not present at this thing. Daniel has been forgotten, probably, ideally, right? Now, through God's providence, there rests a queen. And most people think it's probably most of them think that it's Nebuchadnezzar's wife is still alive. Okay, some think that it's his daughter or maybe granddaughter who witnessed these things, but someone from the old kingdom or from the old turnover, one person still remembers Daniel. And so in all this fear fest, in all of this party, in all of this pagan worship, there's one person that just so happens to remember this old Jewish guy. Well, he's not that old now because he's only 17 when he's taken. Okay, this guy from a long time ago named Daniel, who was able to help in these types of situations. Right? Now think about all that's been set in place by God for this moment. Think of everything that's been governed by his providence. Okay, the Babylonian Empire has risen. The Persian Empire has risen. The Persian Empire is on the verge of overtaking them. Okay, in their arrogance and everything God's given them, the Babylonians mock him and feast. Right? In comes the hand of terror. Everybody is probably, you can just imagine this scene. Most of the people are probably given over to drunkenness and all types of licentiousness at this moment. And now total fear and pandemonium has filled the room. And of all things, we're bringing one man from 20 years ago, it's the last time anyone's really seen or heard anything that he's done, okay, to interpret the vision. Okay. And so we'll skip, we know 13 is kind of the setting, but we'll skip, so 17. And so Daniel's brought in. Okay. This is what Daniel says. So Daniel answered and said before the king, keep your gifts for yourself and give your rewards to someone else. However, I will read the inscription to the king and make the interpretation known. O King, most high God, granted sovereignty and grandeur and glory and majesty of Nebuchadnezzar your father, because of the grandeur which he bestowed on him, and all the peoples in the nation and men of every language feared and trembled before him. Whomever he wishes he killed, and whomever he wished he spared alive, and whomever he wished he elevated, and whomever he wished he humbled. But his heart was lifted up, and his spirit became so proud that he behaved arrogantly, and he was deposed from his royal throne, and his glory was taken away from him. And he was also driven away from mankind, and his heart was made like that of a beast, and his dwelling place was with the wild donkeys. And he was given grass to eat like cattle, and his body was drenched with the dew of the heavens, until he recognized that the Most High God and ruler over all the lamb of mankind, and that he sets over it whomever he wishes. Yet you, his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, even though you knew all of this. Those are extremely important lines when you think about the providence and the sovereignty of God. So Daniel comes in on the scene. He's not interpreted the writing yet. He comes in and he says, pretty much, do you not remember what God did to your father? How he gave him everything that he ever had, right? Which would have been a slap in the face to a king. You wouldn't say that, right? Your father really didn't accomplish anything. Okay, God gave it all to him for his purposes, and gave him the ability to choose who to kill and who to leave alive. Okay, and gave him the ability to conquer whoever he wanted, and given him all these lands and all this power. And when he got too proud, turned him, not literally, but pretty much turned him into a beast of the field, like a donkey or a cow, where he would roam out on all fours in the morning until the dew had wet him. Does that make sense? And he says, and here you are, you've seen all of this, you know all of this to be true. It's not just that you've seen it and misunderstood it. He knows all of it to be true, and you're just as arrogant, and you're just as foolish. Right? Yes, Molly?
It shows the lackadaisicalness that's happened to the kingdom at that point. The way the Persians, or whoever it was, I guess the Persians, the way they enter the fortress is by draining the river.
Mm-hmm.
So they have been so lax that any guard that they would have set on the top of the tower walls did not notice them building a dam, which wouldn't have happened over a day or two or probably weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So they had just got so comfortable with their power.
Mm-hmm.
I think of watching the news and thinking of this great nation that's supposed to be the greatest nation in the world. I don't give a name. But we become lax. They were lax. And so Belteshazzar is just showing really what the entire nation had become. Very comfortable with who they were, very comfortable with what they had accomplished. And in the meantime, had to be within sight.
Mm-hmm.
There's a crew out there building a dam. And they're going to, at some point, put the last block or log on the creek, because that water would have been as high as the bottom of the fortress. That's why you couldn't get under it. So in order for them to drain it, they had to drain pretty far. They had to move a lot of water. So this guy is he's just totally at peace with who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, the water is released, it goes around, and they're able to walk under the walls. It's pretty impressive as far as an engineering feat, but it shows how comfortable and lax the people in front.
Well, and it's dangerous. It's dangerous because that type of comfort and lax. I mean, we have comfort in knowing, again, that it's God who's in control and cares for us. But a lot of people, when you have comfort in the idea of, most of us, I would say, and even most people who are unbelievers that walk around our country, and we're blessed to live where we live, but probably don't spend a lot of time fearing for their life in reality. I'm sure there's many that do, but for the most part, I don't know if anyone in here could say as they were walking down the street yesterday or went to the grocery store that they were in fear for their life. I doubt anyone contemplated their death and when it may come yesterday. maybe you have, but I doubt it's a common thought that you have. I doubt that you've worried about whether God will sustain you day in and day out, though you know it's true, but most people think there's really nothing going to happen to me outside of some minor inconvenience. And the truth is, at any moment, whether you live here in this super secure, prosperous country, or you live in Africa, if God was to take and demand your life in the next moment, he would have it. And that's the truth. They probably sit in this major city that's unlike anything anywhere else in the world, behind these walls, and they think, what could ever happen to us? What could ever be done to us? Right? And that's truth whether you live in Africa, America, in some modern European country, some less modern European country, in the jungles of South America. God is king, and whatever he wills will happen at any moment. And so it's really important that we understand, right? God's sovereignty is never laxed or deterred by where you live or the lifestyle that you've been blessed with. Okay. And so we'll flip over. We'll just start in 25. So he explains all this and he tells it to him, and we'll finish here. And then he moves on to the inscription. Okay. And you can correct me if my pronunciation wrong, but it's Mene. Is that right? Mene. When RC Sproul thought, I swore the first time I listened, it sounded like eeny, meeny, miny, mo. And I'm like, wait a minute. I'm like, I knew this is where we get the writing on the wall phrase, but I'm like, tell me this isn't where you get eeny, meeny, miny, mo. But Mene, tekel, and a parson, right? And he tells him this, and I couldn't imagine being a king and hearing this, right? Because you're terrified anyway, and you know the thought in your mind was, please don't let this be a bad message, right? Please let this just be a warning. Let there be some type of act of grace or something I could do, right? But this is what he says. He says, this is the interpretation. The message, Mene, God has numbered your kingdom and put an end to it. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and you have been found deficient. And Peres, or your kingdom has been divided and given over to the Medes and the Persians. And then Belshazzar gave orders, and they clothed Daniel with purple, and they put a necklace of gold on him around his neck, and they issued a proclamation concerning him that he now had authority and the third ruler of the kingdom. And I thought about what Sproul said. There's probably lots of reasons he did this deal. You think most kings may have killed a messenger for saying that and explaining that. Maybe he thinks he's angered God, and he thinks that by heaping this on him, there'll be some grace for him. Maybe he thinks this message, and probably most certainly, is going to happen way off, right? That's probably even what I would think until you finish the chapter. You think, okay, maybe I've got years to figure this out, years of rule, years of at least living in my palace in this beautiful city with all my concubines and all this wine and all this gold and silver that I've gathered. I've got it all. I've got time. Maybe even Daniel can help me figure out how to get around this, right? And all you know is that night, and I think about this, and it really, it's what a wonderful act and how wonderful God's providence is. All that we really know is that night, the Persians dammed the river. However it happened, and they sprinted into the city, through the streets, to the Capitol building, to the castle. They slaughter, right there, Belshazzar. And who's standing there in a purple robe and a gold necklace on? Third authority in the country, Daniel. Right? Which sets you up for what's about to happen next, because Darius comes in and decides maybe we need to keep some of their smarter guys around, some of these guys who've risen. Right? Of all of God's providence, of the rise of Daniel, of his maybe forgottenness or lower falling. I'm not saying he was just ever below. I mean, he was probably still of high standing compared to others. But in the last moments of someone being honored, it's Daniel. right? And to think about God's providence in all that, of what he gave the Babylonians and how he used them to punish the Israelites, to turn around and punish them for their arrogance, even though their arrogance was based off really what God had allowed them to do. And so God governs all, from here in America to the smallest village in South America, to the tiniest hut, from the largest skyscraper in New York City filled with millionaires and thousands of people, to the poorest village hut in some part of the savannah in Africa. Right? God's sovereignty is ever present, and nothing deters it. Not your own will, not your own wants, not your wealth, not your prosperity, not your power. In the end, God's sovereignty governs all. All right, I'll pray for us and we'll end. Dear Heavenly Father, God, we just thank you for this day, God, and we thank you for your providence, and we thank you for how you've blessed us, Father. I pray that you strengthen us. I pray, Father, that as we move into the service, Father, that be ever present in our minds, Father, that this is your world, Father, and you are King. Father, I pray that everything we do as we move throughout the service, Father, be pleasing to you. And Father, I pray that this morning we worship you in spirit and in truth. In your name we pray. Amen.
Thank you.